AutoLine After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey.
Gary.
John, how are you?
Doing pretty good. How about you?
I'm doing great. So we're going to talk a lot about production on the show today. And here's something that I want your insights on. Okay. Now, as you know, the Model T was in production for 18 years. Henry Ford did not really want to replace that car. He just loved that car, and he just thought you could do everything with it and modify it and so on and so forth. But finally, he was forced into producing the Model A.
Right.
So the Model A went into production in December of 27.
Oh, 27? Oh, okay.
Okay, so it went into production, and then on December 7th, this is thus the Model A, today being December 7th, 1931, it went out of production. So here you have the Model T like running forever. Then you have the Model A going out of production. And I mean, it was replaced. They didn't build that car anymore. So, okay, A, what happened? And B, do you think that was the start of what we experienced ever since?
Yeah, I don't, just off the top of my head, what I would say is it was his son Edsel who goaded him finally into replacing the T, because Ford was getting its ass kicked by General Motors. They needed something fresh and new in the model lineup. And my guess is they recognized the Model A wasn't going to take them another 18 years, and they had to come out with something new. And in fact, if Edsel had been running the company, Ford Motor Company is very likely could be bigger than General Motors today.
Interesting.
Because Henry's fixation on the T and the way he did things really stifled. I mean, he grew the company into the biggest automaker in the world by far. And but his policies then let GM sail right past them.
Interesting. So that was then. This is now. So let's get on with the show.
Yeah. We've got Michael Robinet coming on with us here, and Jack Nerad coming in from California. We're doing this all virtually this week. We'll be back in the studio again next week. But Jack, Michael, great to have you guys on the show.
Good to be with you guys.
Yeah. Thank you. So, Michael, one of the things I wanted to talk about, hybrids. Everyone's talking about hybrids right now. You'd think that the whole EV thing ran its course, and now hybrids are going to be the way that the industry goes. What do you think? Is this just a bunch of media talk, or are hybrids all of a sudden going to be the hot thing in the market?
I think hybrids have long been a great bridge strategy. And for some OEMs, they've been touting it for quite a long time. The Toyotas of the world and others have been talking about hybrids for quite a long time. BMW is using them as well. So this is nothing new. Some OEMs had decided we're going to go right from ICE and maybe ICE and start-stop all the way to BEV. And that is quite a leap. They were hoping to do that and gain some level of economies of scale and get sort of first mover status. But hybrids have been around for a while, I think, and they will be, especially for a lot of applications, towing applications and the like. Hybrids are going to be a strong solution.
Jack. Sorry. Go ahead, Gary.
Well, Michael, I want to sort of follow up on that, and I want to quote you to you. And you wrote, slower consumer acceptance and stalled sales of some EVs in combination with the recent eye-popping labor agreements with the UAW and Unifor unions underscores that the return on capital and labor cost challenges will be core considerations going forward. At no point was this transition going to be smooth. Lumpy is a better description. So fill that out for us a little bit, because it's this EV transition that is not what people think it was going to be.
Yeah, I think a lot of people thought it was always going to be, rainbows and Goldilocks, and it's going to happen without a hitch. And I think those of us that have been in industry for, more than a couple of years know that nothing ever goes smoothly, no matter who you are. And especially when you got in the BEV world, you have, new propulsion system, new platforms, sometimes all new equipment in the plants. New processes, new is always a recipe for disaster. Gary, you and John, and I'm sure Jack would remember when Bob Eaton walked on the stage at the auto show back in 97 or 98, can't remember what year it was, and had a bag of parts and said, these are all the parts that are common with the old Grand Cherokee. And, dropped them on the stage and everybody cheered. And a lot of us just shook our heads, go, whoa, brand new vehicle. That's fun. That'll be a lot of fun to launch that vehicle. And I think the same is with the BEV. It's going to be lumpy. Absolutely.
So Jack, it's beyond lumpy, really. I think it's way beyond lumpy. And what we've seen now that a lot of EVs are in the marketplace is EVs are the province of rich people. It's a luxury market. Those are people, premium priced. We don't see any kind of real movement in EVs that are popularly priced, mass market vehicles. And that's a big problem, right? People who buy EVs also have internal combustion engine vehicles in their household. Going to 100% EV is going to be way beyond. I'll be so dead. I'll be deader than dead when that happens. It's just not going to happen with rainbows and the leprechauns and all that. Far from it. It's going to be a long, long time. People can't afford it.
Well, they can't afford it because the only cars that are out right now are real expensive. But there's going to be a lot cheaper EVs coming out in the next before the decade's out.
Yeah, actually, basically I call it we've BEV'd on the edges. We've done luxury, we've done performance, we've done full-size pickup trucks, and they've all been, very, very quite expensive in comparison to the mass market. We're finally going to start to BEV in the middle, where Ma and Pa Smith from Des Moines can possibly at least consider some of these vehicles in the future. And and I think the technology, we all know the technology is going to get better very, very quickly. Moore's Law is alive and well in battery technology.
Yeah.
I keep hearing that. I don't see it. I haven't seen it in the last 10 years. We're going to have that battery breakthrough that's going to make this stuff, very affordable for the typical person. It hasn't happened. Maybe it will, but my eyes are telling me it hasn't happened now.
Well, it hasn't happened in the U.S. market, but the Chinese market is screaming ahead with all kinds of very affordable models. And don't forget the Chevrolet Bolt, very affordable EV. I think GM's got rocks in its head, pulling it out of production.
Affordable
right
to a point, but when you look at what you could buy for that kind of money, John, with a regular internal combustion engine vehicle, or as we started with a hybrid vehicle that has a lot, or even a plug-in hybrid vehicle that has even more advantages. I scratch my head and go, the typical person out there who's struggling to make a payment is not going to make that big leap to a $5,000 or $6,000 premium on some kind of vehicle.
Yeah, but look at the price of a Bolt. You can get a base Bolt for $28,000, and that's before the $7,500 write-off that you can get on the car. So you can get it for a little over 20 grand. I mean, to me, that's spectacular.
Well, I think it's going away because General Motors is sick of losing money on it, right?
No, I think General Motors made a fundamental mistake in assuming how fast demand for its more expensive EVs would pop up. And remember, Mary's whole strategy is get everything onto Ultium because she needs to hit manufacturing scale, which will bring down cost. So they're in their focus on Ultium. They said, okay, Bolt is not Ultium. Let's just get rid of it. I think that's a huge mistake. It's like, it reminds me of the mistake that they made with Saturn. Saturn came out and it brought in buyers who had never considered any General Motors brand. It was brilliant. I mean, it was,
and they were enthusiastic about them. They had a bit where they were praising them.
Right. And then GM told Saturn, okay, we gave you $3 billion to launch the company. $3 billion back then was a lot of money. And I think stupidly, once they had a toehold in the import segment, import intender, that buyer, pour it on, man. Who cares if you lose money? This is the future of the company. And I think they made the same mistake with the Bolt. They're pulling it out of production in December. They're not going to use that plant that it's built in, the Orion plant, for 2 years. 2 years, they're not. What the hell? Build the car for another year. They're going to put it on the Ultium platform. Mary Barra says it'll be back in 2025, but it's outside of Tesla, the highest volume EV in the country.
Okay,
and
John, okay, let's back up a little bit here. Okay, if we look at history, okay, when the Bolt came out, you had a little bit of blip, and then the car went nowhere.
Yeah.
Then they had the problem with the fire, okay, and then they had a fire sale. So basically they said, oh, we're going to reduce the MSRP of this thing, which then made it more affordable. And then the government kicked in the money. So, I mean, if it weren't for those two things, we wouldn't even be talking about that car. It'd be a failure.
But we are talking about it because it's the best selling EV out there.
It's the best selling other than Tesla.
Other than
tells
Tesla,
you a lot, right? Because
Right.
Tesla is the EV market.
Right.
You know,
Right.
there really is no EV market beyond Tesla.
Right.
You
And,
know,
and
it's
what I'm saying
dribs
is
and drabs.
right. And I'm saying that the Bolt is in an artificial situation because General Motors said we're going to bite the bullet because we have these vehicles. We need to move them. We've got this plant. We've got this tooled up, ready to go. Nobody's buying these things. So let's cut the price. And then to your point, Jack, it probably is something that they're eating a lot of money for.
I think we got to remember that we really had a small sample size from virtually every OEM except for Tesla. And so, you know, going forward, there is going to be more product, but John hit the nail on the head. Scale is everything, especially in BEVs. Someone who's got a premium product, they don't care what cell they've got as long as it does what it's supposed to do. Someone in a mid product, same thing. So, you know, scale is going to be everything in BEVs. And it's still a relatively small market, nascent market is growing. I'm optimistic about it. I don't know about 50% by 2030, but I'm definitely optimistic that it's going to grow.
Michael, guess why I changed my mind? You know, I've been saying all along, I think it's going to be 33% by 2030. Right. You know, last year, BEVs were growing, I think, at a 90% growth rate. Now, then it dropped to 50%. Now it's at 35%. As of November, it was growing at a 35% growth rate. That's awfully goddamn good. Listen, if you keep that same November sales rate in 2030, do the math, I did it, you're at 50% of the market. So we've slowed down to a rate that's still going to get the EV segment to 50% if it maintains that.
Yeah, I still think
the math just tells the story.
Yeah, we need to. I mean, the problem is we've bebbed on the edges, like I said. We have to start offering more vehicles in the middle of the market, and then they're coming. They're not all going to be complete BEVs. There are going to be some range extenders. There's going to be lots of variations, but you know, more battery-like products are coming in the middle of the market.
Well, and I think that's where the growth is. You know,
Yes.
the growth is probably, and we've seen a lot of strength in PHEVs, right, in plug-in hybrids, and we're probably seeing more. In terms of retained value, they're retaining their value very, very well because that's a pretty good solution.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a pretty good solution. You don't have the cost of the battery pack that you have with a full BEV, and yet it will operate as an electric vehicle on day-to-day basis for a lot of people all the time. What stands in the way of PHEV growth is the regulators. They don't want them. They don't want combustion. You know, they want either full BEV or nothing. That's the goal.
Jack, do you think the anti-EV people would go for a PHEV?
I don't know that there are anti-EV people.
Sure there are.
I'm wondering who there are.
They're called Republicans. I mean, and I'm not trying to get political. Just look at their political, plank in the party. They're anti-EV. They just introduced a resolution.
Anti-EV. I think they're looking to continue to use fossil fuels. I think that's a different thing. I don't think anybody is against EVs.
Okay.
It's like, well, why would you be? It's another type of product in the market. I don't think there's a political stripe to it. I think people who own EVs have a particular political stripe.
Yeah, that's right. They do.
That's a badge of honor to them, and that's cool. There's nothing wrong with that.
But again, go back.
I look at it as a consumer product. How does this consumer product work for its cost versus other consumer products? Right. Yeah. That's what I do as a guy who evaluates cars every week and talks on the radio about them. And are you better off as a family of 5 with a PHEV or a battery electric as your prime vehicle? I would say a plug-in hybrid would be a much better bet for you for most families.
Well, sort of to your point, Jack, we had a question from one of our viewers before the show and was talking about, sales of vehicles and price points that would be comparable. And so I looked at Kia, the EV6, an electric vehicle, and compared it in their lineup to the Sportage. It's, sort of about the same size. Okay. So you can get the base EV6 for $42,600. You can get the fully loaded Sportage for $37,800. Okay. And then they were wondering about, how are sales doing? Well, so through November, they sold 17,600 EV6s. They sold roughly 130,000 Sportages. So it seems to me the market is basically saying, hey, we want Sportage, and B, boy, you can get a hell of a lot
cost effective, right? We want cost effective.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, a real good thing to look at is something like a Hyundai Kona that's available in conventional, it's available in hybrid, it's available in electric. And look at the price differential. You look at the price differential and you scratch your head and go, well, much as I love the electrics and I love driving them, I think all of us who evaluate cars absolutely see the benefits of electric drive. It's terrific. But is it worth to the person who's struggling to make that payment, an extra $50 a month, $60 a month? I don't think it is.
I was going to say, nothing like a good old-fashioned oil crisis to get people into BEVs, though.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I just read the headline today. Russia and OPEC are trying to cut oil production to get prices to go higher again because they've come down.
Yeah, it was $70 when I walked in today. So, if we can get it up, and who knows, but if it gets up into the 90s and back up to 100, you're going to find people looking at BEVs in a completely different light.
Well, it's interesting. In Ukraine, a used BEV or a fixed up BEV is the vehicle of choice, kind of low end of the market. Gasoline's too expensive there. So if you have
probably can't get it.
a so-so BEV, a secondhand BEV, you're ahead.
Wow.
So Michael, I want to shift gears in here a little bit and get your insights on what were the consequences of the recent contracts on the industry going forward, particularly in the supply base.
Well, there was a lot of discussion about lost volume, but Gary, to be honest with you, there was some volume lost at some plants, but I except for just a couple of instances, not any volume that can't be made up eventually. So yeah, it's a pain and it interrupted operations. Some suppliers very early in the strike used it as an excuse to lay off, whole swarms of people. And it's like, no, that's probably not the reason, but that's okay. So the strike itself, obviously, once the UAW started hitting the muscle, going after an Arlington, going after a Kentucky truck plant, that's the muscle, and so I'm sure that drove some heightened level of urgency to get things done. And I could be wrong, but I don't think so. No, the impact on the supply base, in my opinion, after this is going to be pretty significant. So we're, in almost any way you cut it and take a look at the economics, we've got the UAWs getting 10, 11% raise. Their 401ks got another 3% match. You start to add it all up, and it's a good 15% in the first year. And then obviously when you look at coal, it starts to calm down a bit after that. But, how are suppliers, if you're building your parts next to the assembly plant and you're paying the people at assembly plant 15% more, it's going to be pretty tough to keep your people unless you keep pace with wages. So, that's going to be increasingly a very, very significant issue with the supply base. So asking suppliers to cut prices because we have to pay our people more, this all works its way through the system. It's not rocket science.
Yeah, in fact, I'll jump in there. Michael and I were both speakers at the Mish Auto Conference this week, and I was talking to a guy. Some of you will know Tom Manganello at Warner Norcross, which is a legal firm that represents suppliers. And what Tom was telling me is the automakers are now coming to suppliers, exactly what you're saying, Michael, saying, hey, our labor costs went up. We need to cut prices. You need to cut your prices. And he said they can't cut them. So what are they going to do? They're all going to hightail it to Mexico. They're going to move production out of certainly Michigan. They're going to move it away from UAW plants because even though the UAW guys are getting raises, that ripples out into the community. Everybody wants a raise right now. And he says the only way that that the suppliers will be able to meet these price cut demands is moving more production to Mexico.
And it's funny, but a lot of people look at Mexico with its sort of this endless stream of labor. But if you take a look at Northeast Mexico near Monterrey,
you can't get people.
You can't find people. So you've got the same sort of Alabama, Tennessee problem that you have in Northeast Mexico now.
Right.
And so you have to go deeper into Mexico where the supply base is not well developed. The road systems aren't as well developed. And it's going to be, sort of this panacea of going to Mexico is only got half the traction, I think, because it's going to be difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So let me ask you another aspect of the supplier situation. So we've been talking a lot about EVs, and we've been talking about hybrids. Now, so the hybrid has an internal combustion engine, and we all are agreed, I think, that the number of internal combustion engines are going down. But to the extent that people are buying hybrids, this means that they still need to keep ICE vehicles in production or ICE propulsion systems. Okay. But then there's this need to have the investment necessary to get the tooling and equipment to make components for electric vehicles. Can suppliers afford to do that?
Oh, that is the question of the decade, Gary, because here's the problem. And I'll just kind of lay it out. Let's say you're supplying the F-150. It usually just the F-150 is somewhere between 500,000 and 600,000 units a year. And again, maybe that same OEM says, I'm going to build an electric version of the same vehicle. And it could be F-150, could be Silverado, could be, the Ram pickup truck. I'm not trying to pick on Ford. It just could be anybody. And that OEM says, well, I need to protect for this many BEVs. And then you start to ask the question and say, well, is there any conquesting? Don't you feel that this buyer, there might be some commonality with these other buyers? And, and I understand the OEM's point. They're trying to protect for the peak volumes of what they feel on both the vehicles are. OEMs don't have a very good feel for it. I would say, most of us in the industry, this transition is really, like I said, lumpy, and trying to protect for both means that you're going to be really underutilized on both levels, to be completely honest. And that's a lot of stranded capital and capital that's not well utilized. It's a really difficult situation, especially when you're paying 8 or 9% on your money these days. You think really hard about devoting capital.
And that's assuming they can get the capital.
Well, I mean, and the banks are being a little bit tighter with it, probably for good reason. And, suppliers, more and more suppliers might be snapping covenants where, they said we make a certain amount of money for a certain level of revenue, and they don't meet those levels. And the bank kind of walks in and says, well, you snap covenants, we need to audit you or put you under guard or watch or whatever. So it's a difficult situation for a lot of suppliers, especially smaller suppliers that don't have the breadth and the width of some of the larger tier ones.
Yeah.
So you look at an industry that had overcapacity to begin with. We ran into COVID and that changed things, but it was not because of we didn't have enough plants. It's because we didn't have enough parts to build in those plants. And then you build greenfield electric vehicle and you build more capacity. So and with the guess that maybe you'll sell some, or you'll sell a bunch, or it'll be 50% of the market, or it'll be 20% of the market. And we don't know. I mean, this is really a crossroads for the industry. There's a really difficult time because you don't know who to bet on. And there's been some really big bets out there that have gone one way or the other. And, I like Toyota's big bet more than I like General Motors' big bet right now. I'll tell you that.
And how do you describe Toyota's big bet versus General Motors' big bet?
Toyota's big bet is hedging, more of a hedge. Some battery electrics, but a lot of hybrids, a lot of plug-in hybrids, letting the market do more deciding, where General Motors has gone full on the, I can't say gas, full on the accelerator on electric vehicles, and maybe too soon, right? I mean, you don't want to be on the bleeding edge. You want to be kind of on the leading edge, or maybe a little behind the leading edge.
No, I think that's fair to say. They got out ahead of the market. I think just about everybody got out ahead of the market because they thought that 90% growth rate was going to be, the new norm. But you raise a really good point there, Jack, in that EVs, even at the 35% rate, are going to grow and grow and grow and grow and grow. And then at some point, the auto industry is going to have to start closing down ICE operations and closing plants. Michael, do you think that'll happen this decade?
Well, according to the contract, no, because they can strike over, a mandate at a plant, and that was an interesting addition to the contract that I'm
Why
sure
would
was a
they
big
agree to
swallow.
that? That is so stupid to agree to that.
Yeah, they wanted to start making vehicles again. Again,
I know, but look, I'm all for the union getting more money, and that's what it should. That's what it's there for, to get more money. But once you start letting the union decide how the company's going to run its operations, you may as well just cut your own throat.
Yeah, no,
I
agree.
talking about that, right?
We're going to have high capacity, or we're going to have low capacity utilization, literally on both ends. Because if you don't know how quickly it's going to shift over, and you've got plants that do one or the other and don't really mix in between, then you really are taking bets on, I feel that ICE is going to be stronger, and so my BEV plants are going to have low utilization, or the flip side. And it's a big bet almost no matter how you cut it. I will differ a little bit. There have been some new plants being built for BEVs, especially with new OEMs coming in, like your Rivians of the world and your Teslas. But except for something like a Blue Oval, most of the OEMs have used existing plants. Now, that doesn't mean they're not going to be well utilized, because they definitely could have some issues that way. But the unions have made a pretty good effort of saying, I don't want this plant to die. Put a BEV in there before you take it and make it redundant. So there's been a lot of work in that respect.
So Michael, let me ask you something slightly different. So we were talking about General Motors and its bet on EVs, and the other evening at the Automotive Press Association, Mary Barra was asked about hybrids, and she said, "We have hybrids. We sell hybrids in China. We have the technology. We understand that." And she intimated she'd let the market lead whatever decision they make. So my question to you is that from a production point of view, how easy or difficult would it be to transition that technology back to the United States?
Well, you're literally packaging a new engine. It may be the same engine, but you're packaging a lot of new content. It's a completely different, at least propulsion electrical system. It's more than your average rip up to make a vehicle into even a plug-in hybrid or a full hybrid. And I think a lot of you will remember, but the OEMs always build to protect for some extra space in case we need to do this, or protect for left and right hand drive, or whatever the case might be. And unless these vehicles have quote unquote been protected for hybrid, basically sandwiching these technologies in, it's not an easy overnight process. Let's put it that way.
So John, do you think she'll do it?
I don't. Because I think if GM was going to do it, it would have had to make the decision now. Because, everything that Michael's pointing out is it's going to take a couple of years to be able to do it. So, I mean, if you think that the market is going hybrid, you better act right now. And the fact that she said we still have not made a decision on that, I found very telling. Because, when it leaked out that they were, talking about it, the assumption in the media is, GM's going to bring out hybrids. And Mary threw a little bit of cold water on that, saying, look, we haven't decided yet. And I would add, because I know from another source, they were developing hybrids for the South American market. Now, I don't know what hybrid powertrains they sell there, but they sell a lot of pickups in Brazil and in the South American market. So if they already had a program down the road for there, they could, Michael points out all the things, but I'm going to say relatively easy. They got something on the shelf that they can go with. But it's still going to take a couple of years to do it. So that's why I think, Mary's in the race to scale. She wants to get Ultium to as much scale as fast as possible. She thinks she'll win the war, at least amongst the legacies, if she's able to do that. So my gut feel says they're not going to go with hybrids.
A race to scale, but there's no nobody's taking it on the consumer side, so that kind of hurts scale, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, Jack, look, we already topped 1 million units this year of EVs. That's a lot, and
most of which were Teslas.
Yeah, absolutely. Most of which were Teslas, but Tesla's losing market share as other EVs come into the market. Sure. They're losing share. I mean, that's just pure math. That's not any kind of a knock on Tesla.
If General Motors wanted to go hybrid, it should go hybrid with its existing platforms. I mean, it doesn't sell any cars here anymore. So trucks and SUVs, and I think they could package hybrid powertrains.
I'm going to correct everybody. They do make a hybrid. It's going to be in production soon. It's the E-Ray.
E-Ray, yeah.
So everybody's been saying they don't make a hybrid. They're completely wrong.
And it's a good one too. It's pretty cool.
It's phenomenal.
Spoken by a Corvette owner, as I recall.
Yes.
Uh-huh. Well, we're talking here about market and about building things. And John, you were talking earlier about the tax credits that are being applied, and I thought it was interesting to see that Ford announced today that they think it is unlikely that the Mustang Mach-E is going to get any money.
No, it'll get probably half. It'll get half the $7,500. It's got Chinese batteries.
Okay.
That's why. That's those CATL LFP batteries.
Okay. So through November, they sold roughly 36,000 Mach-E's this year. Okay. In 21, they thought they'd be selling 200,000 by the end of 23. So Michael, let's go to your point of like predicting and protecting for, making vast numbers of things. So I've got to believe that plant down in Mexico has to be a lot of empty capacity.
Yeah, and
well, hold on before you go down that rat hole, because you're only talking about U.S. sales,
right? I'm not going to. Mustang Mach-E is not going to have more sales internationally than it has here.
No, it has the same. So
so double it.
That plant is going to build about 95,000 Mach-E's this year. It's on track to. They've already built over 90,000. So it's not the 200,000 that Ford told the Wall Street was going to happen, but that's a lot of EVs.
Okay, but 36 times 2 is 72,000, and that's what has been sold. So if they're building 95,000 or 90,000, there's a lot of Mach-E's that are not being sold.
They have the strong export market, but Gary, to your point, let's say they build 95 to 100,000 units this year, but you're capacitized at a supplier level for 200,000. It's tough to make money in that environment as if you're a supplier. So again, this is going to be the yin and the yang of bringing beds into the market. It's going to be lumpy.
And that should be the title of the show. It's gonna be lumpy. Hey, look, we're at the half hour part. I know, Michael, we could only get you for a half hour, so we're gonna sign off with you right now. But we're gonna take a quick commercial break, and the three of us will be back and talking more about cars. But Michael, we'll have you back on the show in the future.
Take care, gentlemen.
Thanks a lot.
Great stuff, Michael.
How do Bridgestone tires stop shorter on wet roads? It's their HydroTrack technology. But you don't have to know how the science works, just where the brake is. What really matters is their Bridgestone.
All right, we're back.
So Jack, talk a little bit more about this affordability problem that you're putting your finger on.
Well, I think there's an affordability problem across the board, and it was exacerbated by COVID-19, right? It made sense for manufacturers to go premium with all the product. If you're going to sell a few, sell the ones that are the most profitable, right? So you go upscale. Honda eliminated the LX trim on Civic and Accord, things like that. It happened across the board. I'm not picking on Honda. It's just that happened because it kind of makes sense to do. This is the sensible thing to do, at least in the short run. But in the long run, where did those buyers go? Well, they went to used cars or something like that if they bought anything at all. That's why used vehicle prices went through the roof over the course of the last 2 or 3 years. It's been a very difficult time, and the new car business or new vehicle business is pricing itself out of the realm of maybe 50% or more of consumers out there. They just really can't afford to buy a new. And if they thought about it, and were even more rational about what they purchased, it'd probably be a smaller number than that. And I think that's a big problem for the industry going forward. Is it's a shrinking market. What we were talking about, or you talked about Henry Ford earlier, putting everybody into cars. That was his, brilliant idea. That was the big idea. of the Model T was everybody could buy one. And we're getting to a point where not everybody can buy a new car, any new car,
Right.
not just, expensive new cars and not just premium new cars.
Right.
So John, is this solvable?
Yeah, of course it's solvable. But it's probably going to be solved with cheap Chinese cars, because you're not going to see the Detroit 3, especially with their latest labor contract, be able to build affordable $20,000 vehicles. It's going to be all north of that. And, all these car companies are trying to maximize their profits. You don't maximize them with small, cheap cars. Even the A and B class segment in Europe, which is the largest segment there, the number of models is shrinking dramatically. And I believe it's because automakers were like, we just can't make money on these things. You go to your board of directors and you say, look, I need $2 billion to do a new small car program. And they go, okay, what's the return on that money going to be? And you got to tell them there's not going to be any return at all. We're not going to make a penny of return on that capital. And then they say, sorry, you don't get the money, because we're not in the business of giving away shareholder money just to have it burned up.
Right. And it's interesting when Michael was talking about cutting into the muscle, he mentioned the Arlington plant and Kentucky truck plant, both of which make big,
most profitable car plants in the world.
Right.
In the world, full stop. Those vehicles are obscenely profitable. But, Gary, getting back to your question, and this is a great discussion. How do you take the cost out of a car? How do you get the cost out? And the only one I see that's really attacking it is Tesla. With this unboxed assembly process, it's giga castings, this $25,000 car that it's going to be coming out with that, people have taken to calling the Model 2. I don't know if they'll call it that or not, but, you got to make gutsy engineering and manufacturing changes, achieving spectacular improvements in productivity if you want to take the cost out of a vehicle. Squeezing your suppliers for more isn't going to do it. And ending up discounting on the dealer lot doesn't make you any money. So it takes bold initiative in design, engineering, and manufacturing to be able to do it.
Jack, okay, you drive new cars all the time, as John and I do. And, it seems to me that the amount of technology that is being put into these vehicles, and I'm not talking necessarily about ADAS technology as much as displays and capabilities to get download things from the internet and get Spotify on your head unit and so on. Do you think that there's a possibility that consumers would be willing to say, okay, I'll take a stripped down car, stripped out of giant nav screens and so on, and I'm able to buy it for a reasonable price and be happy with it?
I think there's a big possibility of that, especially if they can buy a new car for that, for what they'd otherwise pay for a used car. Because people love new cars, right? I mean, a new car is still a pretty cool thing. It's maybe not as cool as when we were kids. And that's a real problem for the industry too, that it's not as cool. But it's important to have that, I think. And it's kind of frightening to me that we're not seeing more recognition of the fact that buying any kind of new car gets people into the habit of buying a new car. And once you kind of get in that habit, then you keep doing it. But if you get a used car and keep it for a long time, which is the best, cheapest way to have transportation, by the way, you're used to that. You're okay with that. My kids have cars that are, my oldest daughter has a car that I gave her when she was 16 and she's 27. Right? She has not replaced that car because that's kind of the ethos in our family. Because I get a new car every week, so why do they need a new car? It's keeping that turnover is really critical to the industry, but the industry isn't paying any attention to that at all that I'm aware of. Well,
the one thing that I think will change that is over-the-air updates. And, Tesla's been there for a decade where you can make the car better over its time. And where the legacies are really interested in this is that potentially with a software-defined car, you can sell services that weren't available when the car was built. And if they're compelling enough, people will pay you for those services. Maybe it's hands-free driving. I don't know. It's certainly not going to be heated seats. They're not.
I was going to say that. People are not going to pay for.
They're not going to pay for that. But if you make
exactly.
something compelling enough, now all of a sudden you can turn your used car fleet into a moneymaker. Because heretofore the model's always been you buy it, you wave goodbye, and they don't see you for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 years, whatever it is. And so you don't make any money, maybe some service, but people increasingly are not going to the dealership to get service, which means you're not selling factory parts in a lot of cases. So, cars with full over-the-air update capability could transform the used car market for the companies that made the cars in the first place.
Yeah. I think we always see mission creep in new cars, right? I mean, the next new car, the next version of pick a make and model is going to be bigger, more powerful, have more stuff, and it's going to be more expensive.
It's mission.
You can't
not
creep,
creep, leap.
Right? Yeah,
leap.
Exactly.
But
so
Gary,
we don't see. Okay, here's a car that's got a 1.5 liter 4-cylinder engine and is 160 inches long or 165 inches long and blah blah, has 15-inch or who has 15-inch wheels anymore, but 16, 17-inch wheels. And that's it. That's what we're going to make the best thing we can make. And it's going to be an affordable vehicle. But we don't see that. Everything gets bigger, more.
Gary, you raised a real point, good point. There's so many features on cars these days, especially when you get into the luxury end, that the vast majority of owners never get to. They like this feature, they like that feature. They don't even know these 4 other features are available. And even if they did know, they probably were like, well, who cares? I'm not even going to use them. And that's where the industry's in a predicament. And this is not a new problem. This has been going on for a while. They're competing with features. And, I'm going to add this feature and that feature. And so when people do their shopping comparisons online and they line up the different cars on the screen and look at who's got what at which price, and then, the automakers believe they've got to have all those features to be competitive. Maybe they don't.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't want to let you go. You mentioned that there may be Chinese-built vehicles that solve the problem that Jack has identified. Okay, now the tariff on a Chinese car being brought in here is like what, 27%, something like that.
27.5, right?
27 point. Okay, so a quarter of it's a big chunk. How is this possible? How could they? It's
because look, you can buy a very nice, simple family sedan, meets all the emissions because it's not going to be electric at that price, and meet all the safety standards. Look nice. It's not going to be anything fancy, but you can buy a nice sedan in China for about $14,000, $15,000. Throw 27.5% on top of that, you're still in the low 20s. I mean, that's how you can do it. And by the way, look at the Chinese going into Mexico. Almost 10% of car sales in Mexico now are Chinese cars imported from China. And it's probably only going to be a matter of time before the Chinese decide they're going to put assembly plants in Mexico and, figure they're going to be part of the USMCA and not even have to pay that tariff to get into the U.S. market.
Do you think that's possible, Jack?
I think it's possible. I mean, one of the things obviously in favor of the Chinese and cost in favor is the labor rate they pay. I mean, look at the UAW contract and then look at what the typical Chinese auto worker makes. And there's a big difference there. I don't know exactly what it is, but I can tell you it's a giant difference. So there is that. I mean, when we're looking at what we might see as an affordable electric, a lot of people are pointing to the new Volvo EX30, right? Where's that being built? Oh, China. It's sure not being built in Western Europe. So it's interesting. I think you've identified a lot of trends there, right? I mean, when labor cost is high in a particular place, where does production go? To where the labor cost is lower. Doesn't that that's business 101?
Yeah. So John, to your point about the Chinese going into Latin America, I thought this was an interesting thing that sort of like went under the radar. So BYD and the Latin American Energy Organization, it's like, who cares, right? Well, the Latin American Energy Organization represents 27 countries, okay, in the region. They announced that they have a cooperation agreement. And the collaboration encompasses promoting sustainable mobility, conducting workshops, providing specialized training in electromobility, targeting public and private sectors, academia, specialized guilds, and regular people. And they're going to be working at universities, and they're going to be bringing BYD vehicles that they're going to be able to use. And I'm thinking, okay, so here you have this giant Chinese vehicle manufacturer that is saying, hey, let's go to Latin America and explain to these people the wonders of electric vehicles based on our electric vehicles. I mean, it's something that is incredibly smart to do, and yet do we see Western OEMs even thinking in that context?
No way. They don't think like that. You know, they've been in Latin America for 100 years. They think they know the situation. And look, the Chinese already did it with motorcycles. They came in, they took over the South American market. And the same thing's going to happen with cars. They'll take it over. And they're leading with electrics. BYD, a number of others are doing electrics. And listen to the Toyotas or others. Oh, Latin America doesn't have a charging infrastructure. Those people don't care about electric cars. So we're not going to go in there. Meanwhile, BYD has taken the long view, and Great Wall Motor, and I can't name all the other automakers off the top of my head who are in the South American market right now with electrics. But they're planting the seeds for a future, and they're getting people interested in their products. And, you know, a decade ago, Chinese stuff was junk. Today, it's as good as anything in the world.
Well, in general, electric vehicles should be cheaper to develop. They have fewer parts. They should be cheaper to build.
They are, Jack. It's just the battery.
Yeah,
it's just the battery.
Exactly. That's the big problem, and a cost problem. And, you know, if you're a little less concerned about the environment as you build the batteries and get rid of the batteries, maybe you have different battery chemistries. And I know they have different battery chemistries in China than are either used or allowable here. You know, it's a whole different ballgame, isn't it?
Isn't the battery issue, though, that, okay, we think in context of you need a battery that provides a long range, yet in other parts of the world, they don't necessarily say we need such a long range. I mean, take Latin America. I mean, okay, you know, drive, you know, the width of many of those countries. It's like driving across a state.
Well, yeah. Brazil's a giant country.
Well, I understand
Argentina
that.
is a big
country.
That's
South America. John.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, so I'm Latin.
Yeah.
So my point being, and then plus I suspect that in places like Brazil, I mean, you know better than I do, but that you wouldn't necessarily ever do that. Okay. We could get in a car right now and go drive and see Jack in LA, and that would be like, man, that's a reasonable thing you should do. But if there were like rainforests and things in between, probably be not as inclined.
Well, you know, let's see where the battery thing shakes out, because everybody's got range anxiety, you know. And one of the reasons I think they got, I've been driving this Hyundai Ioniq 6 all week, and I really like it. But one of the biggest displays on the instrument cluster is how many miles you have left. You know, it's not like a needle gauge, you know, FE, whatever. And the numbers are right in front of you. And so you're constantly reminded, I only have this many miles left. Maybe they should get rid of that. But, you know, what I have found is I want to plug in. I want to have 100% charge all the time. And what I've come to find in the driving around all week is, no, I don't have to do that. You know, I can run the battery down, plug it in overnight, and have a full battery and go days without having to charge it in again. And so I think as people get into EVs and experience them and get more comfortable with how far they can go and when, that's going to change. Also, I think that very interesting today. Stellantis announced it's working with a Bay Area startup. God, what's their name? I'll think of it to do battery swapping. And so
we've heard that song before, John.
I know we have.
We've heard that song for 20 years.
It's called Ample. And, Apple's been talking battery swapping. And Jack, you're absolutely right. It was Shai Agassi with a thing called Better Place. That was, God, that was 15 years ago. He was talking about battery swapping. It's only happened in China, largely with NIO, although more and more automakers are starting to look at it. And it's had a lot of Chinese support.
Well, let me ask you this, John. You have just bought an electric vehicle. It costs $40,000, and $20,000 of that value is in the battery. You want to swap out that battery for another battery that's you don't know anything about, but it's coming from a company that's saying, "Oh, we'll take yours and we'll give you ours." Well, is that something you're going to feel comfortable with doing? I don't know that it is.
I'm a risk taker, so I probably would, especially if it was Stellantis saying, yeah, no problem. Go ahead. It's safe. We've tested it all out. These things meet all the factory specs. You're good to go.
Yeah. I think the difficulty with that, John, is it's not like C or D cells where they're, a C cell from my youth is kind of like a C cell now, right?
Yeah.
But the battery process, and that's a long time ago. But the battery technology is going like that. So, a battery in a car that's 2 or 3 years old probably. That's one of the difficulties I think with Mach-E. In some ways, it's almost obsolete, as it's still being built because the battery technology and the charging technology now is so much better.
Yeah, and Mike the Car Geek has got a great point. You don't own the battery; you rent it, or it's a secondary lease or part of your lease. But no, I know all the problems with battery swapping. You got to have a mountain of batteries there. They've got to be fully charged. As you take batteries out, you got to be able to charge them. So you got a lot of capital tied up in this, right? Not so much in the mechanism to switch that in and out. It's in the batteries themselves.
Yeah.
But the fact that Stellantis would start this program has got me thinking, well, maybe it's time to take another look at battery swapping.
So, I just wonder, as we're getting new vehicle designs that are basically, the battery becomes part of the structure of the vehicle, whether there might not be some design and engineering problems related to that.
Yeah, if you're talking, cell to chassis, yeah, you're not going to swap out the chassis, right? So Ample has got what they call a modular battery. They say you can take any battery pack, put it in their module, and they can swap it in and out. And so this is interesting, Jack, because you're right. The rate of improvement, I think Michael Robinet called it Moore's Law, definitely applies to batteries. The price gets down, comes down, they keep getting better and better. So you may be able to swap out, the battery in your car that was made 3 years ago and have a state-of-the-art battery that's lighter.
Something that's like cooler, yeah.
Right. So, all I'm getting at is, you raised the point, Gary, that everybody's fixated on range. Ergo, we need big batteries to be able to do that. That drives up the cost. I think as some of these other solutions, i.e., more public chargers that are reliable, maybe battery swapping, maybe these powered roadways with inductive charging like they're building in Detroit right now. Maybe all of a sudden at the end of the decade, you go, you know what, 50 kilowatt hours is plenty good for me. Mm-hmm. And if I got to go a longer distance, I'll go to the battery swapping place and I'll get a 100 kilowatt battery.
Yeah,
ever the technology
seeing,
optimist. Ever the technology optimist.
Yeah. We're seeing electric vehicles as being a great car in your fleet, but not necessarily your primary car or a car out of the 2 or 3 cars that your family owns. Terrific. Great thing. That's not going to get us to 100% adoption, though, is it?
No, it's not. And, so I'm totally with you. I don't see 100% adoption until 2040 or something like that. It not by 2030. And, but, as I keep pointing out, we're going to, in the 2025, 2026 timeframe, see a second generation of BEV platforms, second generation of batteries that are only going to make things so much better than they are right now. So don't evaluate the market with what's in the market today. The three of us here, and Michael, when he was on earlier, we know what's coming. I mean, part of our job is to stay abreast of what's coming. And there's a lot. There's a tidal wave of new tech in EVs coming.
All right, so John, let me throw a little something into that projection. So you mentioned earlier in the show about some political pushback, and so yesterday, what you were alluding to, the House actually voted, and they passed a resolution against the EPA going along with the Biden administration's idea that would have the consequence of 67% of the fleet being EV by 2032. Okay. So between now and 2025, 2026, there's going to be an election which may have big consequences on, regulation. Now, if the regulation and by the way, there was that letter from 4,000 dealers that basically saying, slow down, people are not all that chuffed about these things. And then we saw the automakers saying, slow down, we don't know that we can do this. I get the sense that if the stick of regulation goes away, if the carrot of tax credits goes away, what happens to that market then? Besides Tesla, Tesla's going to sell like mad anyway. It's all of these others that I'm not so sure will do well.
Yeah, no, they won't do well. But look, the move to EV is inexorable. It's unstoppable. And these car companies have already invested tens of billions of dollars in this. They can't afford to walk away from it. They have to make it work. They don't have a choice. All these battery plants that are being built all over the country, the new assembly plants that are going up all over the country, they're going to get used. I guarantee you that. And, other things will have to suffer to be able to make sure that they sell enough of those products to make a return on that capital. Because if you yank the rug out from under them completely, you're going to financially cripple them. I mean, you could literally drive them out of business because they've got so much tied up in EVs right now.
Jack, do you see the market accepting?
Well, I don't necessarily, because money means so much to people, right? I mean, most people aren't affluent. Most people are not willing to pay a premium for something, to pay more for a product that isn't as good. From a strictly utilitarian point of view, that's how I would look at an electric vehicle. And there's a lot of ways they are better than gasoline vehicles, but in terms of pure functionality, gasoline vehicle is going to be a more utilitarian vehicle for the cost than any electric vehicle is going to be. At least that's what I see in the marketplace now. That's why I think really smart companies like Toyota are hedging their bets on this and are not going, full boat on EVs.
Well, Toyota
maybe EVs, but maybe not. And we're seeing what Honda is doing in terms of, stressing hybrids now in their vehicles. As some people think it is a bridge technology, I think it might be, we're across the river already. And that's where the technology should be.
But, we had a comment from one of our viewers earlier in the show. You can't get to net zero with hybrids, and you can't.
No.
And so that's what it's going to come down to. Look, the only reason that there's an EV mandate is a majority of the country believes that climate change is a problem and something has to be done about it. That's why there's this whole push for EVs. And I don't think that public pressure is going to go away. And sure, when people come down to where they have to make a decision on what to get, Jack, I think you're absolutely right. Hybrids are going to play a huge role for a long time to come because there's no range anxiety. There's no new infrastructure needed. You just turn the key or push the start button and drive. There's nothing.
I mean, they won't unless regulators have their way and go, well, we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm living in a state where they want to have 50% or more EVs, like tomorrow practically. It's kind of mind blowing, given the demographics of this state and who lives here and what their economic circumstances are. I mean, that's an elite view, a total elite view of what personal transportation should be. Oh, just buy an electric vehicle. Have you priced one lately?
Yeah.
I'm lucky to be driving a used Tercel, is what the person, the average person around here is going to say.
Right. But like I said, you're going to see less expensive, more competitive EVs in just a few years' time. And I go back, Toyota's building, I think it's a $3 billion, $3 billion battery plant down south. Ford's got that $10 billion Blue Oval complex that's going up with 2 other battery plants with it. GM's currently building 3 battery plants. Stellantis is just getting underway of building a couple. Nissan, Honda, Mercedes, BMW. I mean, they cannot walk away from this investment.
Yeah, I mean, if
they
you're going to
don't
sell
have a
cars,
choice.
if you're going to sell vehicles in the United States, given the current regulatory circumstances, certainly, you've got to sell electric vehicles, and you've got to sell more and more of them over time. That doesn't mean the market wants them.
But what if those regulations change? And I mean, and
they
John,
couldn't they?
And John, as you well know, many of these battery plants are being built largely because of the IRA has in it money that they give to people for building batteries and for battery packs.
Right.
I mean, it's just like, so suddenly, I mean, nobody's going to give Stellantis a whole lot of money to start building Hemis, right? But if they did, I'm sure we'd have more Hemi plants.
Yeah.
And if that money stops from the government, there isn't as big an incentive to build all these battery plants.
Well, look, let's see where it goes, because there's a huge national security component to all of this. Even the anti-EV crowd in Congress is not going to want to be dependent on China for batteries, because it goes beyond just cars. There's a lot of defense operations that need batteries. As I'm fond of pointing out, when the American military drops our war fighters into a combat zone, they have 18 pounds of batteries in their gear for communication, night vision, and things like that. Where do you think those batteries come from? And so that alone ought to tell you this country desperately needs to not be dependent on China for key technologies like this. And we've seen it slip away. Guess who invented the rare earth magnet? The neodymium magnet, super strong. General Motors. General Motors invented that. It was a race between them and the Japanese. And so anyway, GM couldn't see making any money. They sold it to the Chinese. There's a whole story behind that too, that it was 2 Chinese defense companies that bought that and greatly increased their warfighting capability. Where was the lithium battery invented? In the United States. But because American capital has no patience, remember, long-term in America, that's the end of the year. That's long-term investment is the end of the year. The Chinese came in and said, we'll happily buy this stuff because we think in the future, this is going to be worth a fortune. And so that's where we're at right now. It's a national security issue. It's not just an EV thing.
I mean, the hollowing out of our industrial base is a national security issue too, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, a big one. And we're seeing that. I mean, we're talking about pushing, all kinds of production to China. I don't know that that's, we want to rely on, a country a lot of people consider our biggest adversary, our biggest enemy.
Sure.
Is that where we want to get most of our stuff from? I don't know that
not anymore. Sense. Look, it all looked good when China was growing. And then this guy Xi Jinping came in and became, the head of the Communist Party and took over, and things changed. And so I'm saying, I think there will be people in Congress who will bring up this national security issue and point out it's not just electric vehicles.
All right, let's end this on something that is not political and it's not an electric vehicle. And Jack, this is something I know you wanted to talk about. So let's just sort of because we were past the top of the hour, but I want to get your take on this. So CUVs, are they with us forever, or is there going to be a shift and a new body design that people will be drawn to?
I wish I knew the answer. I know enough to ask the question, because what are we? We're 25 years into CUVs, almost 30, I think. When you look at RAV4 and CRV from 1995 or that era. But what is it? What is it? When I look at these vehicles, I go, okay, they kind of have the same hip point. They're kind of the same size as, say, a typical American car of 1947. Chair high seating. They're easy to get in and out of. You can see out of them pretty good. And I'm old enough to remember vehicles. I'm not quite old enough to remember vehicles from 1947, but darn close. I think
You've seen pictures of them.
Yeah. Well, my mom used to drive me around a 1951 Chevy. So I remember that quite well. And so I'm like, maybe this is the thing, but I'm hoping that there's some other trend than this, because it gets fairly redundant as a car reviewer to here's the 30th year of the same trend. I mean, and I'm curious at what you guys think might be the next thing.
Look, they're all struggling with it. One of the reasons the Hyundai Ioniq 6 looks so weird, how the big drooping rear end to it, is there. It really, if you look at a lot of the dimensions you're talking about, Jack, it's kind of a CUV, but it doesn't look like one. And now they had to compromise rear cargo area to get that look, so it doesn't look like one. But, think about it. You're talking about a 2-box design that will accommodate 5 passengers, 4 adults comfortably, maybe 3 in the back, a little bit squeezed, a given amount of luggage compartment behind them. You tell me how you come up with something that looks different. I mean, you got a box for the engine compartment and a box for the passenger compartment, including the luggage. Maybe you put tail fins on it, something, but it's hard to get away from that packaging.
Yeah. And as we see electric vehicle roller skates, right? In theory, you could maybe do anything on that, right? You could make it a sports car. You could make it a pickup truck. You could make it an SUV. And we've kind of seen that, but we haven't seen any new type of vehicle based on those platforms. It's just, okay, we'll build an SUV off this. Okay, we'll build a pickup truck off this.
But,
where are we?
Do your own experiment. Get some chairs from the house, some folding chairs or something, and then get a big cardboard box to represent the luggage compartment and a hood. Now with electrics, maybe it's a frunk or whatever. But you play around with the packaging. You're not going to come up with anything new.
All right, we need that okay, Jack. Let me ask you. So coming, I believe next year will be the ID Buzz, right? We're gonna have an electric minivan, which has a styling that is different than the Pacifica. It's different than the Sienna, both of which are either hybrid, all hybrid for Sienna, and then Pacific is available as a hybrid. So maybe the 1-box design will become the phenomenon.
I mean, I love that idea. I had a 68 Volkswagen bus. In fact, I drove it to Michigan State when I was going to school up in Michigan State. And when I look at it, when I look at one now, I go, wow, I was riding in front of the front wheels about that far away from what I could encounter if I encountered a bridge abutment or something like that. So, not the safest kind of design, I think, but something like that strikes me as, because why do we need a frunk? What's that all about? You don't need that there. That was to house the engine. That wasn't a trunk. So
well,
maybe
the only reason
change where the passenger compartment is. I don't know.
Well, yeah, you need the crush zone.
You need some crush zone, absolutely.
And so if you're going to have the crush zone, make it a luggage compartment.
Yeah.
And the front of the Ioniq 6 is about the size of taking a box of saltine crackers. I mean, it's a very small, very
You're
small
right, Gary.
frunk.
But they had to have a frunk. So they got a frunk
what
in
they're
there.
putting in there. I mean, I wonder what's in that, long, like 3 or 4 foot expanse before you get to the cowl and get to the windshield.
Yeah. Well, that's not very impressive, but the frunk in the Ford F-150 Lightning is mega cool.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Silverado has a nice frunk. They don't call it frunk, though. They call it what do they call it? Front trunk or something. They don't want to use the Ford term.
Yeah.
For sure.
Optional storage unit,
Yeah.
auxiliary storage is something.
Right.
Yeah, well, Sean's as opposed to this, if you want to look for a new shape, look at the Li Auto Chinese Mega Van. And that's got a
See where
different
that goes.
form language, but it's bizarre too. So,
Yeah.
well, look, we ought to wrap it up. But
All right.
Jack, great having you on the show. Gary,
Oh, my
great doing
pleasure.
it with you. And let's do it in the studio next
Week in the studio. And see, Jack couldn't actually be there since
No, he
he's,
couldn't. Well, we know we can bring him in virtually into the studio.
Yeah,
too.
and sometime I can, I'm in Detroit area. I'd love to stop by. It'd be
Let
a
us
lot of
know.
fun
Let
to
us
do.
know when you're coming to town. And as long as it's on a Thursday, we'll have you on the show.
That'd be terrific.
Great.
Good
Thanks.
deal.
Always great to
Okay.
talk to you guys. Thank you so
Yeah,
much.
yeah.
Okay,
And
see
thanks
y'all.
to everybody who has tuned in.
AutoLine After Hours is brought to you by Bridgestone Tires, solutions for your journey.